Hi everyone, I'm Shannon and I lead technology product marketing at CBRE for the UK, and CBRE is the world's biggest commercial real estate company. Today we'll be exploring the power of storytelling and how tech teams can harness a few simple rules to communicate with clarity and impact, both within their organisations and the wider industry. First up, let's look at the challenge that we face. Here's a quote from the Harvard Business Review that demonstrates the scale of the problem. Teams everywhere are struggling to create a compelling narrative that will support and enable change. And we know that technology teams are more likely to be driving change at a faster pace than most, yet they often struggle to communicate their work effectively. Tech is notorious for being jargon heavy and leading with complex technical details, which creates a barrier and falls really flat with their intended, often non-technical audiences. And this just means that we're not showcasing our work to its full potential and not getting the engagement and buy-in that we need. So storytelling can help bridge this communication gap, and it can help make complex ideas relatable and memorable. So to help you become a standout storyteller, today I'll be sharing some top tips, tools and templates to help you tell better stories at work and beyond. And we'll go through 3 classic mistakes and how to avoid them to do that. Before we dive into these mistakes, I'm really keen to emphasise that every interaction in the workplace is an opportunity to tell a story and trigger change. I've spent over a decade in marketing and communications, and while my focus is always telling stories that change people's thinking and action, it's important to remember that communication is not just the responsibility or in the remit of a comms and marketing team. Every tech professional needs to master this skill, and with some simple changes, this skill can be demonstrated in every interaction, not just big marketing campaigns or pitches. So on to mistake number 1, which maybe sounds a bit obvious up front, but we'll get into it. Fail to plan, plan to fail. Your communication isn't an opportunity for you to blindly blast your message out to your audience and hope that it somehow resonates. It's up to you to work harder and figure out both your priorities and their priorities and how this interaction can help the both of you. So first up, your own objectives, and you'd be amazed at how many times I've been asked to create a campaign or a message and then to be met with stunned silence when I've asked actually why we're really doing it. If you don't have a real reason and compelling objective behind your communication, don't send it. Everyone gets enough spam and you'll undermine the times you really want to communicate your message. And whatever your objective, it should start with what you want your audience to think, do, or feel differently after the interaction. So do you want to encourage them to buy something or learn something or sign up to something or tell a friend about something? And it doesn't have to even be as direct as that, because we know that brand building is a much longer exercise, and whatever it is, they should have some reaction and ongoing awareness and perception of you and your objective following it. And this can be even done on the fly and at a much smaller scale than a kind of direct to customer campaign. So our working days can be filled with back-to-back meetings, but it's really important just to take a breath and consider what you want out of that coming meeting and what story you want to tell, and then help set your even private agenda to keep everyone on task. And with that, you always need to start with your audience. So you really need to take the time to understand them and what's important to them, and then work backwards from there to make sure that they'll easily understand why your information is relevant to them and take the action that you want them to. So within that, you should be asking questions like, who is my audience? So how familiar are they with the subject? Will they understand all the terms used, or will you need to give them some context and simplify your language? Is English their first language, or do they have any additional accessibility needs? And how far can you flex your tone of voice? Is formal or informal best? And then start to think, what's in it for me from an audience perspective? So consider what drives your audience and how you can align your communication with their priorities. How is this going to help them? And this means focusing on the user benefits versus the technical features of your updates, which is a really easy trap, particularly within the technology field. And a really quick fix here is just saying you more than me or us in your communication. Here's a quick snippet of my marketing brainstorm approach, where I get teams to start with their audiences, whether that's a user or a customer or a colleague, start with their world first, their main jobs, their gains, their pains, before we move into our own service or product. And once we find the connections between both sides, we can then use that to build up a value proposition for a product or an initiative, and then the subsequent messaging and campaign from there. Diving back into this slide, let's just add a final point for our audience, and that is, how are you making it easy for them? So the more complex the subject, the simpler the description needs to be, and that's even more true with technology. So as a writer, you need to be able to understand the subject really well in order to communicate it effectively. And a good way to judge that, if one of your non-technical relatives, and I don't say your mum or your granny because lots of people do, and that's gendered, wouldn't be able to understand it, you need to make it simpler. Which takes us nicely onto our next mistake, and that is TLDR, or too long, didn't read. Here I'd like to refer to the 770 rule, where for effective communication, and especially at scale, one should assume that your audience has the reading age of a 7-year-old and the eyesight of a 70-year-old. Bit extreme, but we'll go with it. So we'll come back to the design elements later, but for now, let's focus on that reading level. So whilst our colleagues and clients hopefully have a higher reading age than 7, they definitely lack the time to properly read or listen or care. And if you're communicating something about technology particularly, they're likely to not be in their comfort zone. So again, we really have to start with our audience. How can you make it as simple and effective as possible? And it's crucial to keep those things simple. And this starts when you first put your pen to paper and start writing out your communication. So first up, this applies to the words you use. And here we'll see on the slide, get to the point is our main piece. So start with your main message and grab their attention from the first line. What is the one thing you want them to take away? And like we said previously, what do you want them to do, think, or feel? And then only include information that is relevant to the reader and that objective. So do they need to know the full thought process behind an initiative, or just how it impacts them and what they need to do? And a line here is, say things as fast as you comfortably can. I think that will kind of serve you well. Next up is keep it simple. So using short and concise sentences, and we'll show some examples in a second. So this will improve readability, and that's particularly important for those with additional accessibility needs. You really need to use everyday language wherever you can, and use plain English and avoid jargon, which again is always a trap within technology. So and a good test is, if it sounds strange when you actually read something out loud, it needs a rethink. And you also, wherever you can, try and find that human angle. Is it a user quote? Is it a story? And it just helps it make it more personal and relevant to your reader. And then active versus passive voice. And I know this kind of now feels like a GCSE English lesson, but really it's just using active voice, an example being everyone should download the software, versus something that's more passive, that this software should be downloaded by everyone, for example. And it just, those easy things can help better connect with your audience and make that action super clear. So for some examples, and these are just super simple examples, and I hope it actually just shows you how small your changes need to be to make a difference. So first up, shorter sentences. Break a long rambling sentence down into punchier bites to keep that attention going. And here you'll see we've actually taken already a pretty short and simple sentence, but it could be even punchier. So subscribe to our newsletter for the latest updates. Want the latest updates? Subscribe to our newsletter. And you'll also see here that we kind of use more active voice and we center the user. And the second piece is putting your reader first. So this is often just a matter of quickly reordering and rewording your sentence, and it makes it less about something you want to tell them and something that they want to hear. So here it's, we are excited to announce the upgrade of Asset IQ, blah. Actually just flip it on its head. If you use Asset IQ, watch out for some exciting new features. And the main theme here is just making your writing sound more human, as if you're actually speaking to a human being. And we've covered it before, but if you wouldn't say it out loud, stop writing it. Communications really needs to become more conversational in the workplace. And then to help with that, we'll just kind of flash up here some really quick, easy word swaps you can use to sound a little bit less like a corporate robot and more like a human being. Utilize is my absolute worst. Why does anyone use it? Just say use. So on to the main part of this session, and that's how to actually turn your communication into storytelling. So one good way to structure your story, and you should always think of it as a story, is what I call the 3 little pigs template. And we'll come on to that why in a little bit. This helps you to stop and take a step back from your message and helps you get into the audience mindset. And it's really a good reminder that although you might be super, super close and passionate to your project or product, your audience isn't likely to be the same. They're also likely to have had a ton of emails and meetings that day and are already feeling bombarded with new information. So don't just storm in and assume that A, they know what you're going on about, and B, they care. So let's start with setting the scene and the context in which your update exists. This helps your audience to kind of settle down in your world with you. What baseline information do they need to know about this subject before you begin? You then come on to the complication. So why on earth are you even having this communication? So what has changed and why do we need to act now? And then this will lead the audience to ask a question, and that will be triggered by the first 2 stages. So we'll be asking, what is the job to be done to try and solve this complication? And then this forms kind of the peak of tension that you build your story in before you offer the release and the solution, or your proposed solution at least. So how are you going to solve this problem? How will we resolve this issue? And then close the chapter of this story. And then over that, you'll see I've kind of overlaid a build of tension as you come up to the situation and the question, and then hopefully the release. And of course, you position it as a release because you want the audience to feel like that's a good idea, it's a breath of relief, and they'll be more likely to take the action that you want them to. So let's apply this to hopefully a well-known story and start practicing. And I know there's not a huge amount of interaction in this session, but I'm actually going to pause for 20-30 seconds just to give you the chance to start thinking, how would I use these sections onto this story? So where would I place each stage of the story into this structure? So just going to hold for 20 seconds and let you have a think. Okay, hopefully you've had a go and haven't just drifted off too much. So let's try and do this together then. So the first up would be the situation. So the pigs live in different houses made of different material, straw, sticks, whatever. The complication is our neighbour is a wolf and he's hungry. So what would that question be? How do we survive and not be eaten? And then finally, the answer is move to the house made of bricks. So bit of a silly example, but 3 little pigs definitely sticks in my head to then apply to kind of more relevant examples. And in order to do that, here's maybe something that might be a little bit closer to our technology worlds. And within my company, CBRE, a couple of years ago, we launched the real estate industry's first multimodal AI tool, which is a real mouthful, LSAI, which thousands of colleagues around the world are now using. But at the beginning of our journey, we had to create a compelling narrative to unlock that investment and support to create that. And that was at a time where AI was a really new concept to most of our colleagues. So here's a simple example of how we structured that story, or one of the stories, to raise awareness and buy-in. So we kind of explained that generative AI was exploding and we wanted to embrace it and to keep pace with the competition. The complication was companies were experiencing data breaches all over the place. Sorry, by using non-secure AI tools. So the question that we presented was, how do we encourage AI innovation whilst keeping our data secure? And then our answer was launch LSAI. So then back to this less is more theme, and to remind you kind of we're still within that too long didn't read and make it as simple as possible. And looking at the 770 rule, that this time for design, so thinking about when we're bringing our words to life. So if we're kind of going with our audience having the eyesight of a 70-year-old, probably a bit extreme, but we definitely still need to use simple and clean design with clear sections and visual aids to make your information more digestible. So first up would be keeping it clean. So formatting is really, really key, and we've got to break down that information into chunks with nice space around them that will make it easier to read. And a simple tip here would be, if you're writing a report, use headings and subheadings so readers will quickly find what they're looking for, and actually use words that hint at what's coming next. So rather than just introduction, say, what is this guide for example. And I know that makes it sound like it's less simple, but it's just more human, it's more obvious. It means that they're actually going to find what they need quicker. Second is show, don't tell. So visual content is usually much easier to digest than like a big block of text. So use images and icons to complement the text and tell your story. And this is particularly important when we're describing technology products, for example, and a screenshot or a quick demo video can tell 1,000 words. And then you've got to be asking yourself, is written even best? So some groups may understand spoken English more easily than written, so presentations and videos might be more effective. And if you do choose a presentation or video as your format, most of the information that you're sharing should come from your voiceover, with your slides only acting as visual cues, much like we're doing here. It just gets your audience to actually listen to you, watch you, and engage with you as a human being, and that's going to kind of help that storytelling element. And then after that, it also applies to your delivery. So you've got to choose the best channel and timing for your audience. Or in other words, which is very well known within marketing communication, it's reaching the right person with the right message at the right time. And on the topic of timing, after all my talk about less is more in the previous section, there's one area that really does not apply, and that's on repetition. So here's our third and final mistake, one and done. So once we've spent all that time understanding our audience, crafting our story and how we're going to best communicate it, it'd be a colossal waste just to send it out once into the universe and hope for the best. As we've covered before, everyone is time poor, especially at work, and our audience have lots of things competing for their attention. And so that means we start to think about repetition and how we're going to build a campaign. So we're actually starting with another 7-base rule, lots of 7s in this presentation. But it's often said that people have to come across your message 7 times before they really notice it and start to take action. And I think that this is probably massively increased in even the last few years, considering the huge amount of information we are exposed to every day. So repetition boosts your chances of your audience even seeing or noticing your message in the first place. And then it taps into something called the illusory truth effect, which sounds very fancy, but it just means that we tend to believe information as correct after repeated exposure. So people consistently rate repeated statements as more truthful than non-repeated ones. Why? Because our brains love repetition, and it actually helps to create that comfort of familiarity. So when your audience first comes across your message, which is hopefully, going back to previous principles, asking them to do, think, or feel something differently, they might instinctively shy away from that change that you want them to do. Change is scary, as we all know. But as they see your message more and more often, they'll become more familiar with it, and their brains will find it easier to process and be more likely to engage with it. So a single message really won't land it. But that doesn't mean that we don't just like mindlessly spam people. Definitely don't do that and kind of just keep hitting with the same message in the same way. We've got to start thinking about that as a wider campaign, which could be running over weeks or even months and years to really build that influence and familiarity and hopefully trigger that change. And an example might be, and this is not tech specific, but hopefully relevant for everyone in the audience, would be when you're going up for promotion. So this can't just hang on one end of year conversation with your manager when you drop it out of the blue. It's actually a much broader campaign, and think of it like a communications campaign throughout the year. You've got to make your ambitions clear. You've got to prove consistently how you're working towards that point and communicating across your networks, not just with your manager. Think of all your influencers and your supporters and your stakeholders, so that you're constantly proving your value and making your case. So again, it just goes to show that storytelling can be applied to anything. It's not just kind of a big product launch. It can also be a personal matter. And that brings us to the end of the session, and I really hope that you found it helpful, and I'd love to answer any questions you might have either now or following up with me afterwards, and I'll put my email in the next slide. I'll leave you with a quick summary of what we've covered for you to take away as a bit of a checklist when you're planning any form of communication, or I guess as we're now thinking it, storytelling. So thanks very much. Thank you for joining, and hope you have a good rest of the day.